want to go first?
So as Jared just mentioned, I'm Kristina Pecorelli.
My name is Kaz Sakamoto, and we work for the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And today we're going to talk about livability in New York City. Does anyone here feel like they're rent burdened? That's it? All right, well.
Well, maybe our presentation will show you more hands at the end. Okay.
Is it timer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So today we'll be looking at rentable housing in New York City. The map on the right here shows the existing rental housing stock distributed across the 5 boroughs. And as a rule of thumb, affordable rents are considered those that comprise less than 30% of your income. So renters should spend no more than 30% of their annual income on housing. And while people in New York City may be willing to allocate a greater share of their incomes towards housing in order to, enjoy a lot of the amenities that the city has to offer, landlords are increasingly starting to impose income restrictions on new tenants. So I know in my experience, I've had to prove that I make at least 40 times the monthly rent in order to be able to live in that apartment. So we have increasing supply-side constraints. In addition to just unlimited stock of housing, there's also now eligibility requirements being kind of informally imposed by a lot of landlords. And so as the 2 data points on the bottom suggest, even though wages have stagnated, median rents across the city have continued to rise at an accelerated pace, which is kind of prompting this affordability crisis that we hear about so much. And just to give you a little bit of a deeper sense of the extent of the rent burden in New York City, the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey, which is conducted by the Census Bureau every 3 years, found that over 50% of New York City households were considered rent burdened in 2014, paying a third or more of their incomes on rent and utilities. Kind of even more dire is the fact that 30% of households in New York City allocate more than 50% of their incomes towards rent. And as evidenced by the mayor's affordable housing plan, in which he intends to build 80,000 new units of affordable housing and preserve an additional 120,000 units over the next 10 years, this is one of the leading priorities of the current administration, as well as of EDC, where we both work. And it's also an issue that just affects all of us as residents of New York City. So I think it deserves a greater in-depth analysis, which is what we do today. We're obviously not the first people to attempt to visualize this. Some similar studies that have been done in the recent past include the one on the left, which is from Next Street, and the one on the right, which is from NYC. The one on the right has an interesting time-lapse component where you can really see the shifts and the changes in neighborhoods over time. Our presentation today won't include a time period analysis. We're thinking of maybe including that in the future, but ours has the added benefit of getting down to the census tract level, which we think offers kind of a more deeper picture of what's going on in neighborhoods, and trying to tie that back to recent changes elsewhere throughout that census tract. So be it a zoning change or a massive new development that's been built, or units, the affordability requirements amongst existing units are expiring in a lot of cases. A lot will expire in 2017, so I think it's an important component to include more detailed geographic information. And so the question we're trying to answer today is, what is the minimum income required to live affordably, again defined as paying no more than 30% of your income on rent in your census tract. And this is kind of the process that we took to devise and design this map that we'll show you in a little bit, and we'll kind of explain in depth a little bit more about each of these steps. So first, in terms of the data pool, in order to get down to the census tract level, we relied on the American Community Survey, again, put out by the census, and we pulled the variables on the left using the census API in R, And census tracts, just for a little bit more background, are statistical subdivisions of counties that range in population from 1,200 to 8,000. They average around 4,000 residents. So in New York City, that can be, a couple of blocks or, a more larger geographical unit, depending on which borough and in which part you're in.
And then for the more granular level data, we ended up scraping Craigslist, which is not super legal, so don't tell anyone that I did that. But basically, for the city, we work with census data, and it's not the most up-to-date. And if you're at the end of a cycle, you might be working with decades-old data at that point. And so for us, in our studies, we have to use census because it's the most comprehensive data that we have. But also, we need agile data, and we can pull that from like StreetEasy or Craigslist. And so with Node.js, I scraped Craigslist to get the number of rooms, the asking rent for each posting, and then the latitude and longitude if there is one. And that way we can use that and then map it and then aggregate it and get a median asking rent. And so that way we can look at what's actually happening right now as opposed to something that maybe was surveyed like maybe 2000 or 2010. And then we get that data like years later, right? So that was the data that we pulled.
And it's also, just to note, kind of an important, not only a gut check, but also a good point of comparison. So the census is median asking rent in that census tract, which includes a lot of rent-stabilized, rent-controlled units. So Craigslist are units that are currently on the market. They don't have to be new units, but newly available units. So it's kind of a way to see what is the existing composition of that census tract versus the people who are likely going to be coming into that census tract. So what is the anticipated socioeconomic change, i.e. perhaps gentrification, which is a word we don't really use in our line of business, but so that's just another reason we decided to use both.
And in terms of the geography, so we have to map it out. And right now, we have the US Census Tiger file, so they have all of the different census tracts, census block groups, census blocks, zip codes, counties, all of that data. And so to use that, we have to first download it, and then we bring it into R, and with the RGDAL library, we can convert that shapefile, which is more of a proprietary file. I don't know if you guys have worked with it, but it usually comprises of 6 to 7 different files, so it's already pretty hefty, and it has usually a projection, the database file, it has topology attached to it. So with that, you might have to change the projection, and you can use QGIS, which is an open source tool as well. You can use Esri, which is not open source, and if you're not in a business or in a university setting, it's going to be really expensive. And so QGIS definitely is a great tool for that. And different projections when you go from a 3D shape, so something like the Earth, and into a 2D shape, you're going to have to make a lot of different assumptions. And you can preserve a couple of different things, such as area, distance, the angles. And so with datums, there's a lot of different datums that help you. These are points along the Earth that actually is the backbone to what the projection is when you put it out into a 2D shape. And so you might have to convert the projection or the datum that you're using. And then so we did that in QGIS. We brought it into RGDAL, changed it from a shapefile into a spatial polygon data frame. And then we imported the leaflet library. I think you guys talked about it a little bit earlier on. And now we could use the new spatial data frame that we just converted from a shapefile. And depending on the geographic data, you might have lat and long, or you might have polygons. So it's going to be a list of different latitude and longitude points to create that topology. Or it might be a line, and you can use leaflet to then draw that onto your map. And leaflet is native to JavaScript, and so it's being brought into R. So I think there's still a lot of stuff that is more friendly to keep it in JavaScript and use it as in your browser. But for this talk, we wanted to use Shiny since it's new and it's exciting. And the great things about Shiny is that there's a lot of easy layouts and it's highly customizable. So you don't have to do a lot of the styling, it does it for you. You can also add plots and maps straight from the code, so we don't have to work something in R and then port it into the web page itself. The Shiny combines it for you, and then there's already HTML tags, so you can style it. And then for Leaflet, Leaflet is great because there's a lot of pre-made tiles out there. I use Stamen's Toner Light. You can create your own using Mapbox's Tile Mill. And then you have a lot of different options of different data types, like using a GeoJSON or a TopoJSON. And then you can style it all interactively, so whenever you change the data, it'll just style it for you. So let me switch. Sorry, this is.
So we're going to show you where you can afford to live in New York City. But we have to switch computers. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is this full size? All right, so when designing our tool, it was really important for us. I'm a spatial analyst at the EDC, and so when you look at a neighborhood, it's actually a really big area, and in New York City, you can walk block by block, and it's really different. And so a census tract, the smaller the unit of geography that you can get into, the more rich data narratives that you can show. So, God. All right, so our main map is showing the rent burden by percentage in census tracts. And so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And so the darker the colors, the higher the rent burden percentages in New York City, and the lighter colors are areas that have a smaller percentage. And so you can see that if you were to look at it in a neighborhood scale, you'll miss a lot of these finer grained details. And as a city, neighborhoods are great, but we want to look further into a smaller geographic unit. And you can see that there's actually spatial patterns that start to emerge that you might not be able to see with just a neighborhood map. And maps are just a great way to tell stories because you can look at a table, you can make a plot, which we also did. But spatially, I think that's where we really want to focus on. And then we also have a secondary map that shows the scrape numbers versus the census tract numbers. And so you can see that the size of the circles correspond to the rent being asked in Craigslist. So the larger the circles, the larger the rent. And then the darker the color is, the higher the median rent, gross rent is in the census tract. And you can start comparing visually areas that might be incongruous or similar. So the rents in the census tract or the rents in the census tract versus the Craigslist versus the census, are they the same? Are they different? And then is the Craigslist asking rent higher, or is it lower than the census median gross rent? And that way you can start to see that Craigslist, it's a much newer data set, so it might be telling you areas that are seeing higher rents being asked. And
Yeah, and so just to touch upon Kaz's point that especially in our line of work where we're doing real estate development, so if you're not familiar with EDC, we kind of have several missions or responsibilities. So we operate and manage city-owned assets. So we did the High Line, Hudson Yards,
Seward Park.
Yeah, Seward Park,
Willets
Brooklyn
Point.
Army, yeah. So a lot of the ones that you hear in the news, for better or for worse. And so we really try to project or assess the impact of our projects on the surrounding communities. And census tracts have proven to be kind of the best way to do that. And so just in our line of work, we hope to someday kind of integrate this into EDC's portfolio to kind of see real-time changes in affordability based on the projects that we do. I mean, some of them are probably going to have a positive impact on housing prices, which, what can be done to kind of curb some of that effect for in lower income areas.
And so these tools like this help inform policymakers, whether they're politicians or there are like development team or our Center for Economic Transformation teams, to actually visualize the areas that might be have the highest needs and have the biggest rent burdens. And the areas that we pull with newer data, we can show them that there might be incongruencies in what we're actually seeing with the census data and what's actually currently available right now. And then you can also bring in tables with areas that are highly rent burdened. And these tools are really customizable. So with our project managers have a lot of different demands. So I know everyone works with different teams. And so this allows us to show what exactly they want and then maybe show them something that they weren't expecting.
Right, and so just to reiterate, so the minimum affordable income is what you'd need to earn in the census tract in order to be able to afford the median rent in that census tract. So, so it's basically 40 times whatever the median rent is. So that way, you're not paying more than 30% of your income on rent. And in this census tract, for example, 29% of households do not meet that threshold. So they're paying more than 30% of their incomes in rent. And that's actually not so bad because it's a lighter color. But if we go to, it's hard to see because it's not on the laptop, but so here, 43% pay more than 30%. I'm trying to find like a bad one. Yeah, 40%. So this is kind of a tool that, again, we hope to integrate, but we also hope to improve upon. So we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions and suggestions for ways going forward. We hope to someday kind of make it a little bit more interactive, maybe with kind of like an input box where you can put in your own income and then see only those census tracts that you could afford to live in. That would have been helpful to me when I was apartment hunting on a government salary. And so
I don't know where we would be able to afford, but
yeah.
It would be interesting to see.
Yeah. According to this map, I am rent burdened. So are there any questions?
Howdy, thanks. I've worked in this area, so I'm very curious about what you're doing, apart from scraping Craigslist, for data that we need and use that's real time. So for example, I'm in 2nd Avenue in the corridor that's really exploding because of the prospect of perhaps the next century, a train extension.
Yeah.
But whatever the case, there's a Philippe Starck building where there was like an abandoned church 2 years ago. And I see the fact, what you opened with, that the census information might as well be from the 1800s. So for example, I'm speculating whether or not we're going to have a commercial crash as chains like Staples and Duane Reade go completely into the cloud and start closing all these areas that they drove up.
Yeah.
So how can we actually, what predictive information can we gather to substantiate my anecdotal argument?
Well, I know in some of the work that we've been doing recently in anticipation of rezonings that the mayor has announced is trying to look at what the effects on small businesses will be. Will their rents go up? Will they be able to afford to stay? And so that's a little bit separate. It would require a different data source of commercial asking rents and vacancy rates, which we have access to. So we're in the process of exploring those things.
And there's been actually a lot of conversions from commercial to residential too.
Yeah.
So I think the market will just pick up what maybe like big boxes leave behind. So.
Yeah, hi. I worked a long time ago with the rezoning of much of the historic districts of New York City. And Jane Jacobs, way back when I was a little boy, was the heroine of New York City. She stopped Robert Moses. For those of you who don't know who that was, you should look him up. The point is that, is your work going to help? Can it help in analyzing what neighborhoods are going to be attacked by this rezoning nonsense that the mayor's going to put through?
I don't know if we should be talking about this. This analysis did not go into his decisions, but I mean, he's announced a few in his State of the City address. Okay, so, all right, so, you know, I'm confident that city planning and the administration are taking these things into account. Yeah, the census API is totally accessible. We scraped Craigslist.
I think that's...
There was a very small sample size that we ended up being able to scrape with that provided latitudes and longitudes. So we're interested in exploring other sources, but none of it's proprietary. I mean, it's industry data, but you don't have to pay for it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Well, you can ask questions at the bar or at the next break. Thank you very much.